All right, it's 6 o'clock, folks. Staff, how are we looking?
I think we're looking good. Thanks for your patience. This is the first time I'm running this meeting solo without Heather or Megan, so hopefully it all goes well. I am ready when you are.
Okay, thank you, Donna. Okay, everybody, we are here to commence our October 19th, 2021 zoning or planning board meeting. We'll start with our roll call after this call to order.
Andy Mefford did not respond. Is he here?
I haven't seen him.
Not yet. Okay, Dave Loomis.
Here.
Dave Loomis is present. Micah Sewell.
Here.
Micah Sewell is present. Jim Bashand.
Here.
Jim Bashand is present. Josh Schrader said he could not attend. Neva Hassanen.
Here.
Neva Hassanen is present. Toon Pham.
Here.
Toon Pham is present. Ellie Costello. Not, there's Ellie. Ellie Costello is present. Shane Morrissey.
Present.
Shane Morrissey is present. Sean McCoy.
Present.
Sean McCoy is present. Mr. Chair, there are 8 regular members and 2 alternates present tonight. Would you like to appoint both alternates as a regular voting member?
Please.
Thank you.
Okay, so we got a bit of a full meeting tonight, so I will try and keep us moving forward and tackle this meeting. So let's start out with the approval of the minutes from the last meeting. If there's anybody who wants to make a motion.
So moved.
I'll second.
So moved by Dave Loomis and seconded by Shane. And any comment, any issues? No? Okay, let's go ahead and vote. We'll do a roll call vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 And any opposed? Sounds like a unanimous vote. The minutes passed. So the next portion of our meeting is the public comment section. And this section is just general comments from the public. It doesn't have to be necessarily related to the agenda. You're just free to call and comment on maybe something coming up or whatever your heart desires. So if you're online and doing it through the Zoom webinar, you can see on your screen instructions for joining in on the meetings. If you are calling in via phone or streaming online live and need to call in via your phone, you can call into numbers. One number is 1-253-215-8782. And then a toll-free number for landline users is 1-888-475-499. The webinar ID is 842-9399-6424. Repeat that one more time, 842-9399-6424 for the webinar ID. Password is 999636. You can press 9 to raise your hand to make a comment and 6 to mute and unmute your device or phone. And also a reminder that if you are calling in on a landline or cell phone or something else other than what you are watching it on, please mute the thing that you are watching it on, because there will be an echo or reverberation, and as well there's a bit of a delay. So just be patient, and when you communicate there might be a delay, and we'll go from there. So we'll give it another minute, since that takes so long to explain, or 2, to give folks a chance to call in. And if we don't get any calls, then we'll move along. Okay, I'm not seeing anything here. And unless staff tells me otherwise, I'm gonna go ahead and move on here. So just kind of moving slow, make sure nobody calls in. The next line item on our agenda is staff announcements, which I am pretty certain we do not have any of. Is anything changed on that, staff?
Sean, I was just gonna mention here, since Josh isn't here tonight, and I know the old business item was something that he is very passionate about, and the Highway 93 South traffic stuff, I was gonna just ask that we move that to next meeting. I've been doing some research back into some of our older meetings for March and trying to figure out what's been going on with that. So we've been kind of communicating back and forth with some emails as well. And so I'm hoping when he's here next month, maybe we can bring that up. So I wasn't going to stay on for the end. So I was just going to say my little piece. And if you guys have questions or anything else throughout the evening, just feel free to let me know.
Absolutely. Thanks for that reminder. Yeah, that sounds great to me. I think unless anybody has any objections, we'll go ahead and table that discussion for the next meeting when Josh is here. Great. I'm seeing thumbs up and not head nods. Okay, so now we are done with our staff announcements. Next portion is public hearings, and tonight we have a city's rezoning request, the Millsite Special Zoning District Amendment. Emily Gluckin, I hope I got your last name right, project planner of Missoula, is going to be making that presentation.
Thanks. Let me just share my screen.
Yeah, and 1 second was Shane, which part of this were you gonna step out of?
I'm going to step out of this portion. If that's okay.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, good evening. My name is Emily Gluckin, and I am an associate planner in the Development Services Division of Community Planning, Development, and Innovation. Tonight, I will be presenting a request from Don MacArthur of MMW Architects, who is in attendance tonight, on behalf of Millsite Revitalization Project LLC to amend the standards of the Millsite Special Zoning District. To get us oriented, the subject property is located south of the Clark Fork River and north of the Milwaukee Trail, between California and Hickory Streets, and more broadly located between Russell and Orange Streets. It is in the Riverfront Neighborhood Council and City Council Ward 3. Zoom in a little bit. The Millsite Special District covers 46.59 acres. The existing portions of the special district are currently accessed from Wyoming Street. And in a few slides, I'll go into more detail about the subdivision and the special district. But first, I'll take you through a little bit of analysis. Our Missoula 2035 growth policy recommends a land use designation of community mixed use for the majority of the Millsite Special District, and parks and open lands for the portion of the Millsite that contains Silver Park, which is that area in the north of that map. So areas designated as community mixed use are intended to integrate basic employment services with main transportation corridors. And they are characterized by a broad range of functions that include retail, education, financial institutions, professional and personal services, offices, residences, and general service activities. And the growth policy states that the zoning districts most closely aligned with this land use designation are C1-4 neighborhood commercial, C2-4 community commercial, and M1R2 limited industrial and residential. And then areas designated as parks and open lands are intended to be used as larger park areas that are in public ownership, larger common areas that are intended for use by a group of residents, or larger conservation lands. And the growth policy recommends OP1 open space as the relatable zoning district to those areas. So diving into the growth policy a little deeper, in addition to the land use designation, staff reviewed the goals outlined in the chapters of the growth policy and identified a number of them that related to this proposal. The economic health chapter encourages a dynamic mix of businesses, housing, and retail in the downtown area that contributes to the economic vitality of Missoula's urban core. The housing chapter encourages the promotion of live-work opportunities through mixed-use developments. And the community design chapter describes the city's focus inward approach to development, which ultimately promotes pedestrian-oriented mixed-use development that allows a range of retail, residential, artisan, and commercial uses to be located in close proximity to one another. The Millsite Special Zoning District is also located within the Missoula Downtown Master Plan, which was published in 2019. So it's within those plan boundaries. And it refers to the Millsite Special Zoning District as the Old Sawmill District, which may be a term that some of you are familiar with calling it. The plan states that a mix of residential and commercial uses are appropriate within the neighborhood. A wide range of housing densities and scales, and ownership and rental opportunities should be encouraged. The Downtown Master Plan also describes the Old Sawmill District as the next tech hub that can draw in new tech industry and build upon the existing amenities for tech workers. And it also encourages new mixed-use development on the north side of Wyoming Street to continue the strengths of the existing mixed-use developments that exist on the south side of Wyoming Street. So a little bit deeper, the Millsite Special Zoning District is located within the Southside Riverfront Planning Area. And the Southside Riverfront Area Comprehensive Plan Amendment is the document that governs that area. And it encourages a mix of residential and commercial uses in the Millsite area, as well as establishing it as a neighborhood center. The intent statement of the current ordinance for the Millsite Special Zoning District states that the intent of the special district is to emulate and build on the Southside Riverfront Area Comprehensive Plan Amendment by providing a mixture of land uses, including civic, general commercial, office, retail, service, and residential in a pedestrian-friendly design. The mixed-use options that are encouraged by this plan include commercial uses on the ground level with residential uses at the second level and above, as well as residential uses adjacent to commercial uses. So following this analysis of these three documents, staff found that the proposed expansion of allowed uses, as requested by this amendment, will continue to reflect the goals for mixed-use development in the Old Sawmill District that we identified in the growth policy, the Downtown Master Plan, and the Southside Riverfront Area Comprehensive Plan Amendment. And we found that this would be achieved by the amendment would continue to contribute to the economic vitality of the area while continuing to promote a pedestrian-oriented pattern of development in the Old Sawmill District. So the map is chaotic, so I'll try and distill it down a little bit. The Millsite Special Zoning District is shown as the hatched area on this map. And in a few slides, I'll go a little bit deeper into each of the sub-districts. And this special zoning district, as I mentioned before, is regulated by a zoning ordinance that prescribes specific standards for that district. And the surrounding zoning districts include industrial zoning to the north and the east, public lands and institutional zoning to the south and the east, and business, commercial, and a mix of medium and low density residential zoning districts to the west. The Millsite Special Zoning District is surrounded by a mixture of public parks, public trails, community centers, governmental offices, multi-dwelling residential buildings and single detached residential buildings. And it is also bordered on the east side of the special district by the railroad tracks. The property was originally subdivided in 2007 to create the Millsite subdivision. And at this time, it was rezoned to the Millsite Special Zoning District. In 2009, 2012, and 2014, City Council approved amendments to the phasing plan for the Millsite subdivision. And the 2014 phasing plan, which is the most recent one that was approved, includes 11 phases with a deadline of December 31st, 2025 for the final plats of all phases to be submitted for approval. The phase 1 Wyoming North final plat, which is what we're seeing on the screen right now, was filed in May 2015. And no other final plats have been filed for the other phases of the subdivision at this time. In 2013, City Council approved amendments to the Millsite Special Zoning District, which included updating the zoning to reference Title 20 standards, along with a number of other amendments to the language of the ordinance. And this is the current zoning ordinance that's used for the area. The Millsite Special Zoning District standards are divided into 6 sub-district sections, which are A, B/C, D, E/F, G, and then H/H-1/H-2 are lumped into one section as well. The zoning ordinance begins with a general development standards section, and these provide setbacks, build to line, architecture, building height, lighting standards, loading and unloading, parking, common area, landscaping, and on-premises liquor, wine, and beer sales standards that are kind of general throughout each district. And then there are specific standards for each sub-district that provide unique requirements and in some cases supersede the general development standards. Sub-district B/C of the district is the location of the proposed amendment that we're discussing this evening. It is bordered by sub-district H to the north, H-1 to the east, H-2 to the west, and D to the south. It's located between Wyoming Street, Moose Creek Trail, and Silver Parkway. And the northern sections of Moose Creek Trail and Silver Parkway are associated with future phases of the Millsite subdivision, so they are not yet constructed. This subdistrict is in an area intended for a mixture of commercial and multi-dwelling residential uses. And these residential uses are only permitted on the second story and above. And detached houses and 2-unit houses are prohibited in this district. And so subdistrict B/C currently has a restricted use area on the street level along Moose Creek Trail between Wyoming Street and Silver Parkway. There we go. Where my cursor is right now. And also on Silver Parkway between Moose Creek Trail and Big Timber Lane. And in this area, there are only specific uses permitted, and these include restaurants and cafes, restaurants with cabaret licenses, taverns and nightclubs, retail trade, and sidewalk cafes. The applicant is requesting to remove this restricted use area from the standards of subdistrict B/C with this proposed amendment, effectively striking out item number 3. So the removal of this item will also require the renumbering of the following items listed in the ordinance as shown here. This table demonstrates the uses that are permitted in the remainder of subdistrict B/C, which would be allowed following the proposed amendment in the area that currently has this use restriction. As you can see highlighted in blue, that the uses currently permitted in this area would still be permitted following this change, but just with a wider range of uses also allowed. It's worth noting that any proposed uses in this area or new development will need to comply with the off-street parking schedule in Title 20 and the parking requirements for specific uses that are outlined in the special district. So staff examined this application using the review criteria for rezone requests found in Title 20 and found that the proposal generally complies with the criteria based on the following conclusions. So number one, staff found that the rezone request complies with the economic health, housing, community design, and community mixed use goals of the growth policy, as well as the goals of the downtown master plan and the Southside Riverfront area comprehensive plan amendment. Second, staff found that public health and safety will continue to be ensured following this amendment through the availability of emergency services, law enforcement, and fire protection in that area. Third, we found that the property is in an area adequately served by sewer, water, stormwater facilities, motorized and non-motorized transportation infrastructure, parks, and schools to support this kind of amendment. Fourth, staff found that the proposed amendment would maintain the building setbacks, step backs, height, and green space requirements that currently exist in the Millsite zoning district to facilitate the provision of light and air. Staff found that the proposed amendment will retain the mixed use pedestrian friendly pattern of urban growth and character that was intended for the Millsite special district. And staff found that the rezone would provide opportunities to conserve the value of buildings and address a changing condition by allowing the existence of non-residential uses that can be supported by current market conditions and can also address fluctuations in market conditions over time, thereby preventing vacancies in that area. And finally, staff found that the proposed amendment is in the best interest of the city as a whole because it will continue to promote mixed-use development and economic opportunities in a high-density environment in close proximity to downtown Missoula. At this time, staff has received 3 public comments, and these comments raised concerns about the vagueness of the request and an unclear intent for the relaxation of the current use restrictions, as well as concern about a change in development expectations over time and throughout the lifespan of this project. Staff received 1 agency comment from Aaron Wilson in the Transportation Division of Public Works and Mobility, stating that the change to remove use restrictions on the ground floor is consistent with city goals for mixed use and walkable neighborhoods. However, they encourage the acceleration of the installation of the traffic signal at Craig and Orange Street to keep up with expanding development in this district. To conclude, staff recommends the adoption of an ordinance to amend the standards of the Millsite Special District to remove these restrictions on Moose Creek Trail and Silver Parkway in Subdistrict B and C. And I have the legal description attached as an exhibit in the record if you need to reference that. Thank you.
Sorry, mute. Thank you, Emily. Is there anybody on for the applicants? Is that Don MacArthur? Is that correct? Is there any presentation from them? Do they have anything they want to say at this time?
I just say a few words. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Planning Board, for hearing this matter. You know, there was a question raised by a few folks. Why are we coming at this time for this action? And I guess I would say in 2007, when this subdivision was first subject to rezoning. I think there was a more active kind of idea of creating a particular kind of retail action in the old Sawmill District than there is now. If you read the current downtown master plan that Dover Cole recently put forward, I think the real retail centers of town are more in the central business district and along the hip strip. And the retail activity in the old Sawmill District or Millsite is really more sort of neighborhood retail, in my view, our view, I guess. And I just wanted to point out that this proposal does not in any way change what's possible in the district. Everything that was possible before is still possible. You can still put a restaurant in any of these areas. It's just that you're not required to put a restaurant on the first floor of these buildings. So we think it meets the goals of neighborhood mixed use land use designation, and it just removes the restriction that you have to do this on the first floor. And as Emily pointed out, the developer has had a lot more difficulty leasing or finding tenants for retail space in this area. So there's certainly the market demand is a little less. And I would also say that the other thing that spurred us is that we've been the architects for the 2 new buildings that are being erected right now on the north side of Wyoming, in between Moose Creek and Silver Parkway. And the one building, what we call Building 3, which is in the southwest corner of that block, is subject to this restriction. And we are making a retail suite along the Greenway face, but we also realized that we needed access both to a parking garage level below and to office space on second floor. That the best locations for it was on the corner of the building. And so it turned out that this restriction would make the best use, sort of limits the access points. And even though we're putting retail on that frontage, we still didn't meet the strict requirement the way we had proposed it. So I think that partly we're looking for just flexibility to actually respond to the needs of the buildings, to have some portion of that frontage not be retail or restaurant. And it just seemed like the right thing to do to give the developer flexibility on that, given the overall goals of the neighborhood. Here to answer any questions that you may have, and hope that you'll support this.
Great, thanks, Don. Appreciate your comments. I see Dave has his hands up. Dave, go ahead. You have a question?
2 questions, and Don, thanks for answering question number 1. That was what's different about it now? It's just the all variety is available for this section. There was a reason for it then. I just was curious because I was not involved in any of that. My second question, Don probably has the answer to this too, is so at what phase is the traffic signal at Orange going to be installed? What triggers that?
Point of order.
Yeah.
Conceded. Thank you, guys. I was having a hard time interrupting Dave.
Sorry,
Dave, we need to do public comment before we move into questions. And
okay, well, it's
sorry about that. I was in my head, I wanted to interrupt you, but I was like, I don't want to interrupt Dave. Sorry. So if that's all done, my apologies, folks. I should have jumped in there. If everything's done with staff and the presentations, we'll move to public comment here first. Excuse me. And for public comment, I'll just review really quick. To call in, you can call in, it says cell number, but 213-338-8477, or toll free from a landline, 1-833-548-0276. Again, the web ID is 842-9399-6424, and the passcode is 999636. You can press *9 to raise your hand to be recognized for public comment, and *9 to raise your hand, and *6 to mute or unmute yourself. Remember, if you're calling in from a separate device than you're watching or listening to, please mute that separate device because there will be an echo. I'm not seeing anybody in the queue at the moment. But we'll give it a minute here for public comment, and then we'll go from there.
There is an attendee in the waiting room, Leslie Collins. Would you like to call on this person?
Yes, please.
Thank
Call
you.
on them. I'm not seeing them there. Leslie, do you know how they're calling in, Donna? I can't see them.
I believe the hand went down again. I'm sorry.
That's fine. That's fine. I appreciate you noticing it. Might have to put that for a question for later, because it seemed like Vince was seeing people in the waiting room or queue. Well, we'll still give it another minute here. Maybe that person ran into a technical difficulty. All right. Not seeing anybody getting on here or hearing from staff. I will kind of drag my feet here just a little bit longer, but we're gonna go ahead and close the public comment period. Oh, hold on a second. No, we're not. Hello, Leslie, are you there?
Yes, I don't know how to.
Yeah, but
Here,
actually,
unmute.
it's
It's
somebody
you.
else. Are unmuted.
Can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Okay,
You're coming in loud and clear.
okay. This is Jackie Day.
Please just give us your name, and you have about 3 minutes to speak.
Okay, this is Jackie Day, and Leslie Collins is my neighbor, so we're both right on the border of the development on Montana Street. Okay, so what we were trying to find out was whether I had talked to Emily a couple weeks ago about what would be added in addition to the ability to have restaurants, cafes, taverns, nightclubs, cabaret license, retail trade, and sidewalk cafes. And at that point, she didn't know, but I think she covered it in her introduction that now there will be transportation hubs and what were the other things that you mentioned, Emily?
I can bring up that slide again if that would be helpful.
I think that would be helpful. And if need be, I can read them off.
Okay.
So this table is showing, these are all of the uses that are currently allowed in subdistrict B/C.
Okay.
I highlighted the ones that are specifically allowed in that use restriction area, but those are also included in this
Okay.
area. So any
So there might
any
be
of these uses.
there might be motels in this area, medical labs, surgical centers. Those are all allowed now. I mean,
Yes, if this is approved, ultimately, this is just one step in the process. It will have to go through other steps, but if it's approved ultimately by city council, yes, everything listed here will be able to go in on the ground floors only, is my understanding.
well, I guess we have some reservations about that. I do at least. And then on this letter that we received in the mail, there were 11 criterion for rezone requests. And on your list, there was only 9. So 4 and 6 were left out from the letter, and only 9 were on the list.
On today's presentation.
Yeah. I'm probably
I
burning
can,
minutes.
a few of them got condensed together, but in the staff report,
Okay.
they're expanded.
Is there, do you have that slide available? Review criteria? There it is.
Okay. So, yeah, provision of light and air is number 5 on this list, and 4 is whether the zoning is designed to facilitate the adequate provision of transportation, water, sewage, schools, parks, and other public requirements. Is that included somewhere else? In one of the 9 that are on here?
On the slide?
We can have Emily address that if it's possible. Do you have any other like specific questions at this time?
Yeah, I have actually I have 2 if I have time. Is it
I can give you 1 more minute.
okay? Is it in the best interest of the city as a whole to have all of these type of businesses, retail, medical, transportation hub here when we have it like right across the river?
Okay. Anything else for the board tonight?
Well, only that all those little roads that are going through that development, like the shoot off from Montana Street into the new development, are there any considerations about putting speed bumps in there?
And I want to acknowledge the fact that you're using the name Montana Avenue and it's actually Montana Street in all of your visuals. Please, if you could change that.
It might mess us up.
No, that's a good typo to find. Thank you. We appreciate that.
All right, that's it. We're good.
Okay. Well, thank you for your guys' comment and taking the time to sit and listen and be part of this meeting.
You're welcome. Thanks for doing everything.
Staff, has anybody else come on since we were talking to the last folks?
No, there's no other hands raised in the attendees list.
Thank you for that. That's perfect. That's what I needed. Thank you, Donna. The attendees list. Gotcha. Okay. Well, I think with that, we will go ahead and close the public comment period of the this period, and we'll move on to board questions. And board members, this is time to ask questions of staff and Don MacArthur, if you have any, and then we'll move on after that. Dave, you got the floor first, I think.
Well, first question's been answered. Second question is, what phase of this project is supposed to provide the light at Orange Street?
Should I go ahead and answer that? I'm not sure whether Emily should take it on or I do, but I'll take a stab at it. The next phase, phase 2, is when there is a requirement to address the corner of Wyoming and Craig Lane and Orange there. So that's the I know that the developer is in process of trying to, is moving toward that. So fairly imminent that area will be addressed.
Thanks, Don.
Okay, all right. Okay, I think Ellie, you had your hand up next. Go ahead, please.
Thanks. So just hearing the concerns from those community members, I wanted to clarify, to my understanding, those other uses are already allowed for most of this area. It's just, we're just talking about the part that's kind of facing Silver Park. Is that's correct, of changing the use requirements for that one specific face?
That's
Is
correct.
that correct?
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Great question. That's a good clarification. Thanks, Ellie. Anybody else with questions at this time? Coon.
Yeah, Ellie asked my question, but I wanted to follow up more for my own benefit is, again, in line with the public's comments, like the list of allowed uses seems pretty diverse. I was more curious, is that a general zoning ordinance for throughout the city, or is it something very specific for this district? Because again, it is pretty diverse, meaning like there could be a parking lot or there could be a dispensary, which I think is pretty random. I don't know, so maybe Emily, if you.
Yeah, sorry, my dog was barking in the background, so I'm gonna see if I got most of your question. Are you asking the list of those like particular restricted uses?
No, I was just more curious. Yeah, I was just more curious, more generally speaking, the list of allowed uses is pretty diverse. And I was just curious if that is a general zoning thing, or is that something specific to the zoning district?
So that is specific to the zoning district. That list was identified as uses that were desired in the area when this, when the ordinance for the special zoning district was created. Which was before my time, so I can't speak to the history of that, but they seem pretty reflective of what would be allowed in the relatable commercial districts. I can't speak to why those specific ones were chosen, but those were the uses identified for this area in particular to be allowed.
Great, thank you.
Okay, looks like Neva's got her hand up now.
Hi, thanks. Hi, Don, Emily. So I just want to be sure I got this right. So this is a project that's been in development for 25 years and in the process. And so and the zoning in this particular phase, you're wanting to change right now because of market conditions? Why exactly? I mean, I think that the public comment made a good point, essentially, like the expanded uses here are pretty broad. And I thought originally, and behind the whole idea was mixed use, retail, restaurants. I guess I don't understand the need for the change, and I may have missed it. So maybe you could clarify it for me. Thanks.
I'll start in on that. I think maybe it's addressed to me. So just to further clarify, a building that is on this frontage, every use that is in that zoning district would be permitted on the second floor. In fact, it would be permitted on the first floor as long as it was 10 or 15 feet back from the frontage. So we're not talking about a complete transformation of what uses are permitted in this building. We're just talking about literally that narrow band of frontage on the street. And so, I think the goal here is as we use this ordinance, first time just a few months ago, we realized that yes, we need to actually have circulation that connects floors that is on that frontage. That's not retail. And the strict interpretation of the ordinance as it is right now is you can only have retail and residential. So partly it's just mechanical. We need to be able to have some portion of that frontage dedicated to vertical circulation that connects both underground parking and upper floors. And currently, as the planners are reviewing this for zoning compliance, there's no pathway for them to say that was good enough. It just says the whole thing has to have that retail, retail and restaurant. So that's item one. Item two is that, as goals have changed, if you look at the location of this requirement, it basically fronts the green space. It fronts the common green to the west, and it fronts Silver Park to the north. And, that at the time seemed like the way that we would want to develop restaurant and retail. And nowadays, I think people generally view that as street oriented, that we are going to, have restaurants, retail fronting the traffic of streets. So I think there's just a little bit of a change of understanding about where these uses are going to be most effective. So those two pieces are why we're here in front of you today. And I guess I'd say one more thing, which is, we have this kind of goal for many areas, downtown Missoula, Hip Strip. This is the only district that requires restaurant or retail on the first floor. Downtown, you're not required. Hip Strip, you're not required. So this is an anomaly that is actually pretty unusual.
So just quick follow-up. So what you're saying is the original intent, though, behind having a mixed use community is still met with this change, right? I guess that's what I'm getting at. And I really appreciate your explanation. Thanks so much, Don. Thank you. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, this to me, removing this actually makes it more in keeping with traditional mixed use, zoning districts, in my mind.
Great, thanks, Don. That was a good response. Mike, I got to you next. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Don and Emily, for the presentation, the information. If I understood correctly, there's 10 more plats, 10 more phases that will come in by 2025. I was just curious if there are changes foreseen that, to zoning like this, like things that would need to be adjusted in these future plats, or if this is, just the length of this project seems like it's given to things changing in the work. So I'm just curious if there are other, issues like this that may come up as those additional phases come online.
I guess I'll take this one too. We hope not, but I expect so. I guess is the short answer to it. As Emily said, the zoning was written in 2007. We actually were the applicant in 2013, I guess it was, and that was when we started doing several new buildings and came back and asked for a few, we started using this district that had not been well tested. And when we started to actually do building design, we realized there were a few things that were awkward. And so we did come back and tweak a few of those, keeping, in my view, keeping the overarching intent of super pedestrian oriented, a great place to walk around and to combine, sorry, my dog's chewing on a chew toy, a great place to both live and work and recreate. There's a lot of recreation that this area really provides access to. So I think that this minor tweaks have all been taken in this notion of the underlying vision of where we were trying to go, still are trying to go. And it's I think a great thing for the community as it develops. And it's right now, it's been poised for a while to take off. Dave asked about phase 2. And when phase 2 is filed, that's going to be the rest of this commercial district and a good portion of the residential, what Emily showed as E and F. So things are happening. The sort of the economy right now is really driving that. Now's a good time to take the next steps. So we're hoping to get this minor little area of zoning cleaned up to make sure that doesn't cause issues. But probably, Micah, there will be some other little things as we go forward. We've gone through most of it now, so it's probably pretty small, but there might be other things.
Great, thanks there, Don. I'm not seeing anybody else's hands up. I'm gonna take a stab at a couple of my questions. So I wanted to, and I think this will be for Emily, to try and address the public comments a little bit more specifically. And I wanted to start with the 2 line items that they had missing from that list. I'm sorry I wasn't able to catch and write them down, but if we could address those maybe, or that question.
Sure. So I condensed a couple of the criteria into one bullet point just to make it fit on the slide. So I can bring up the staff report or bring up the rezoning criteria and go through all of the items if that would be helpful. Because I don't know them off the top of my head. So
no, that's fine.
I can pull them up.
Yeah, let's go through that.
Give me one sec. Almost there, sorry.
No, you're good. And maybe while we're waiting for Emily to bring that up, I noticed hotels and motels on the list too. And I guess maybe Dawn, you could address this while Emily's working on bringing that up. What's the likelihood of a hotel, motel, like going in here? That was brought up by the ladies on the phone as well.
It is possible and certainly permitted by zoning. It would be permitted by zoning right now. In any of these blocks, you might have a little bit of have to go through or have a retail frontage if you kept the zoning as it were right now, but it would still be permitted 10 feet back. You probably could have a hotel with a gift shop in the front and meet the current zoning requirement. So I guess my point would be, it is permitted. It is possible. It would be possible even if you left the zoning in place as it is right now.
Great. And that's kind of what I was hoping for you to say pretty much, Don. I feel like that was my understanding as well, as whether or not we change this or not, a hotel can go there. They just have to change their arrangement a little bit, which is not that tough.
Right.
And were you ready there, Emily?
I'm ready. So I'm just gonna bring up my,
Thank you.
yeah, I'll bring up my staff report. So I just kind of squished together, we have, so they're worded kind of weirdly, so you have to end up having a lot of letters, but, so I combined together, I think there's a criteria of whether the zoning is designed to secure safety from fire and other danger. I combined that with whether the zoning is designed to promote public health, public safety, and the general welfare, because they're related. And then I believe in a separate criteria on my slide, or a separate bullet on my slide, I combined together the 1D, which is whether the zoning is designed to facilitate the adequate provision of transportation, water, sewerage, schools, parks, and other public requirements, with the whether the zoning considers the effect on motorized and non-motorized transportation systems. I just had a point for how did I call it? Public services and transportation. So those were lumped together as well.
And that makes total sense to me. And hopefully that can address those folks' questions. And if anybody else, watching or listening wants to go back and refer those, they're each laid out pretty specifically with staff's reasoning behind each line item there. I am not seeing any more questions from folks. Would anybody like to entertain a motion? And we can probably get that put up on the screen here. And then once we have a motion in a second, we'll go to our discussion between us board members. Neva, I see your hand there.
I move that we approve the adoption of an ordinance to amend standards of the Millsite Special Zoning District for the property legally described in Exhibit A to remove the use restrictions on Moose Creek Trail and Silver Parkway in Subdistrict B/C.
Thank you, Neva, for that. Second?
And I'll second.
Oh, Ellie beat me again.
Seconded by Ellie. All right, now we can have some discussion, I believe. Any comments? Nothing? Nobody?
I guess
Everybody's feeling okay? Am I leading this along correctly? Dave, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just for the record, I think it's appropriate for the planning board to say something about this particular amendment is appropriate given today's situation. Otherwise, the entire district has already been established. So we're just revising and tweaking a very small portion of it to broaden out the number of uses, and it's supported by the findings and conclusions of law brought to us by staff.
Very good. And Ellie, go ahead, please.
Similarly, I kind of echo Dave that this doesn't feel like a major change to a lot of what you can do in this district. And hopefully we will see that mixed use really plays a big part in this district as it grows. And well.
Great, thank you. And Neva's hands up.
I'll be supporting this. I think that it, obviously, since I moved it, it seems to me that this district and this whole area and project are an incredible an incredible example that Missoula should be really, really proud of. This is, at least 25-year process, coming to here. And I trust that this spirit of this is really coming to fruition today is so cool. And I mean, when I moved here, it was all huge piles of, old chips and who knows what all along the river. And it's just been remarkable to see this district be redeveloped and, including parkland. And so I'm happy to support the continuation of that vision and into a reality. And thank everybody, Don, everybody who's been involved over these many years.
Great, thanks, Neva. Is there anybody else that wants to comment on the motion at this time?
Sean, can you hear me?
Is that Leslie? I'm sorry.
Yes, it is.
I'm sorry, this portion of the meeting is not open for public comment. This is the opportunity for board members to discuss their position amongst themselves. So I'm going to have to ask you just to hang with us and take the ride and see how it goes. Ellie, did you want to say something?
I realized that I hadn't fully expressed my thought about why some of the additional uses might actually be a positive thing. But some of the things on that list are also things like daycares and the idea that daycare could maybe face the park instead of it just being for commercial use and in terms of a restaurant or something, gave me a lot of hope. And so there are some positives to kind of opening up this for other possibilities.
Great, thank you. That's a good point. And I don't see any other hands up at this time from board members. I'll go ahead and speak to the motion. I believe I'm going to support this as well. The one thing I wanted to get on, I guess, public record as well is just addressing the comments from the public as well as far as transportation goes, and the fact that not only do I feel like the city and staff need to prioritize transportation on Wyoming and the traffic light in general, not only in that section, but down on further, Wyoming as a whole has become very busy. And I speak to that because I live in this neighborhood. And I know I've mentioned it in the past, but I think I'm just going to go ahead and keep letting the city know that the Wyoming has become an avenue for side traffic at top speeds of all sorts of makes and models and kinds. And we're going to have to address it, I think. And I think we're going to have to try and put a little speed behind that. So ideally, we can get some progress in that area. If there's no more, that's all I have. If there's no more comments, we'll go ahead and take a vote. And it kind of feels like at this time we can just do a yay or nay vote. So all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed? And the motion passes with unanimous consent. And that finishes that portion of the meeting. The next portion of the meeting is communications and presentations. We have 2 presentations tonight. However, I am going to need a 5-minute bathroom break. So I'm just going to call that. And staff, if we could just get 5 minutes here. I've got 7:05, so we'll try and get back at 7:10, and we'll pick up from there. Thanks, everybody. All righty. Let's see, it looks like we're waiting on a few folks still. We'll give it another minute. Okay. I'm seeing more folks joining in, so we'll start rolling along here. Okay, so the next part of our meeting is special presentations, and the first one we have is on the recreational marijuana ordinance, and we have Casey Trepard. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your last name right, Casey, who is with the city, and she's going to be giving us a presentation.
Yep, and last name was correct. It's actually Cassie though for first name, but I will be presenting with Madsen Matthias and Spencer Stark as well.
Great, thank you for the correction. I'm terrible with names.
You're good.
As Cassie said earlier, my name is Spencer Stark. I'm an associate planner with CPDI at the city of Missoula. I'm joined by Cassie and Madsen Matthias. The presentation we have for you this evening is to go over the cannabis zoning code amendments that we are proposing. This is a informational meeting to prepare for when we come back to this board on November 2nd, presenting the ordinance and asking for recommendation from the planning board moving forward to city council. So that was just a little background on the purpose of this presentation, and I will pass it over to Madsen.
Awesome. Thank you, Spencer. Yeah, first, a quick recap on the history of this issue and why we're here. The state has allowed for medical cannabis use since 2004, when the first initiative was passed. It's been back and forth on how that's been administered, allowed for, and enforced, but it's always been contained to medical. Last year, there was a new ballot initiative that called for the legalization of recreational or adult use, as they say in the bill, cannabis use, which is a recent change for the state. The legislature passed a bill to address and implement this change in the last legislative session, and we are responding to this. As the bill practically encourages local governments to integrate our cannabis business categories into the new state regulations and update our regulations locally. So we've had the opportunity to look into how we addressed medical in the past and how other places have responded to this type of legislation, being the recreational legalization, both statewide and nationwide. And our aim has been to propose a reasonable and responsible set of regulatory revisions that will address future impacts of this new bill here in Missoula. Next. So within the last year, starting in November of 2020, voters approved Initiative 190, which directed state legislatures to draft and adopt House Bill 701, legalizing adult use recreational cannabis in the state of Montana. As a part of House Bill 701, the legislature directed the Department of Revenue to draft licensing rules for adult recreational cannabis use by October 1st of 2021. This is to facilitate the implementation of legalized recreational cannabis, allowing for existing medical businesses licensed before November of 2020 to convert to recreational before allowing new recreational license applications on July 1st of 2023. Recreational business licenses comprise cultivation, dispensaries, manufacturing, as well as a few more obscure licenses. And then a quick note on this, the DOR has stated that medically licensed businesses may start engaging in recreational sales starting January 1st of 2022, the ones that were medical in 2020, without immediately applying or paying for a recreational license. The DOR assumes that any business that may become recreational will become recreational at the turn of the year. They then intend to update individual business licenses and charge the appropriate fee for recreational operations at the individual business's next renewal cycle. Next. So I also wanted to do kind of a quick facts on the House bill, the brief overview of some of the criteria that are outlined in there, and then specifically the ones that relate to the regulations that we're revising. Much of this has served as the foundation for what we do and don't need to address at a local level. So pertinent building and land use regulations include there may be no transfer of marijuana product through a drive-up window. So that's a drive-through for a dispensary or cultivation and manufacturing. No advertising, including electronic media. A licensed cannabis business may not transfer alcohol or may not sell alcohol, tobacco, or hemp from their business. And then similarly to liquor stores, they cannot be open between 8 p.m. and 9 a.m. daily. They can't be visible from their operations, can't be visible from the public right-of-way without visual aid. And they cannot be within 500 feet of a school or place of worship. So we didn't write any of this, and this is what's written in the bill. Additionally, the chart below outlines timelines and restrictions placed on who may apply for certain licenses, at what time, and under which constraints. Medical licenses may be applied for at any time, including today, at the turn of the year. They will not be able to become immediately recreational, but must wait until July of 2023. As was mentioned, recreational licenses are only available to businesses that were licensed as medical back in November of 2020. And cultivator licenses additionally have a few important restrictions on them. So until July of 2023, cultivators may not expand beyond an absolute canopy size of tier 5 or 10,000 square feet. Additionally, outdoor cultivation is prohibited for anyone that was not already licensed to be doing so before November of 2020 when the initiative was passed. Next. So currently there are approximately 70 cannabis-related businesses within the city of Missoula. 50 of those are dispensary businesses, and the remaining 20 are split between cultivators, manufacturers, and mixed-use businesses. So meaning a combination of the aforementioned ones. So cultivation, manufacturing, testing use, and so forth. And this map will displaying the number of cannabis businesses in town also shows some concentration of these businesses in a few areas. Now I'll pass it off to Cassie, I think.
Sorry, I was muted. So after researching the impacts of cannabis-related uses, staff were able to categorize these impacts into 3 main concerns that we believe can be mitigated through zoning code amendments. Staff decided the impacts do not vary between medical and recreational uses, so they're treated the same in our recommendations for consistency. Staff evaluated known cannabis land use impacts on public health and safety. Fewer public health and safety concerns were identified with retail sales than with cultivation and cannabis product manufacturing uses. Cannabis product manufacturing uses are more likely to utilize chemical extractants and heat and pressure. Cultivation requires proper ventilation, attention to humidity to prevent mold, and proper disposal of wastewater and solid waste. Cannabis uses have the potential to impact neighborhood character. Cannabis uses include dispensaries, cultivation, manufacturing of cannabis products. Each of the business activities impacts surrounding neighborhoods differently. For example, a retail dispensary is better suited for commercial areas with similar structure form, whereas manufacturing of cannabis products is likely to produce impacts more suited for industrial areas away from commercial corridors and residences. Staff will also address how commercial cultivation and manufacturing within homes is likely to impact residential character and public health and safety. The map of existing businesses on the previous slide showed saturation of dispensaries within certain areas like downtown or the intersection of Russell and Broadway. If dispensaries continue to cluster, they will lead to a lack of diverse uses in a particular neighborhood, affecting urban form and access to amenities for certain areas. To obscure cannabis products and provide security, many dispensaries have installed frosted glass, decals, or otherwise opaque windows. This causes a lack of storefront transparency, and active transparent storefronts provide visual interest to pedestrians and create a safer environment. Frosted glass inhibits storefront activation, which alters urban form and neighborhood character. Oh, we just lost lighting. There we go. Spencer, next slide. So the 2035 our Missoula City Growth Policy is the guiding regional plan for the city of Missoula. Zoning regulations aim to implement the goals and visions of the growth policy, and the recommended zoning code revisions address impacts in alignment with the goals of the growth policy. Goals relating to neighborhood character promote neighborhood accessibility to amenities and services, support efforts that diversify the base economy, and identify appropriate locations for industrial uses. These goals can be implemented by appropriately defining and zoning cannabis-related uses and limiting saturation of retail dispensaries to promote access to a mix of neighborhood services. The growth policy aims to maintain the unique identity of downtown Missoula and maintain quality development. Additionally, a diverse base economy is essential to all commercial areas. These goals relate to protecting quality urban form, including active commercial storefronts and promoting access to diverse uses. Urban form can be protected by identifying the form of each cannabis-related use and permitting them in locations where the use aligns with the neighborhood context. Lastly, Goal 1.16 of the growth policy calls to identify best practices for implementing crime prevention through environmental design. I'll explain this concept in more detail in a later slide, but it more or less promotes visual connections between public and private spaces to improve public safety. And just as a note, public health and safety isn't well addressed by the growth policy, and that's because it's backed up by zoning and addressed throughout city policies and regulations as a primary goal and function of government.
So based upon the passing of adult use cannabis within the state of Montana, and after examining the goals of the growth policy, as well as other guiding documentation, staff has developed 4 land use amendments to the Title 20 zoning ordinance. The first is to align current use classifications or the state use classifications within Title 20. In particular, we are looking at 3 classifications of cannabis use. The first being cultivation, the second retail dispensary, and the third manufacturing. Historically, we've treated medical cannabis cultivation as a manufacturing use. Staff is not proposing a change to that classification, but instead is proposing to delineate the sizes of cultivation across 3 separate manufacturing subtypes. The first being artisan manufacturing, which we are recommending that cultivations no greater than 1,000 square feet in canopy area. In this case, canopy area is the area in which the plants are contained and includes all supporting structures such as trellises or stands. We're recommending that these cultivation sizes be considered artisanal manufacturing, which will be a conditional use within B1 and B2 districts, permitted outright in B3 districts, all commercial districts, and all manufacturing districts. The next canopy area designation is for those areas between 1,001 square feet and 2,500 square feet. These would be considered a limited manufacturing use. It would be a conditional use in B3 and permitted outright in all commercial and industrial zone districts. And then all remaining cultivation sizes, those be between 2,501 square feet and 50,000 square feet, would be considered a general manufacturing use and would be limited to the limited industrial area and the heavy industrial zone district. Aside from cultivation, retail dispensary, historically we have treated as a general retail use, and we're proposing to keep with that interpretation, but codifying it in our zoning regulations. General retail is allowed in all B districts, commercial districts, and industrial districts. And then manufacturing use, as Cassie highlighted earlier, often involves solvents under pressure. When we examined similar uses, it became apparent that manufacturing cannabis concentrates is most appropriate as a general manufacturing use, which is allowed in limited and general industrial districts. There are a few remaining use classifications addressed in the state legislation, these being transportation and testing. However, we have use classifications existing in Title 20 that adequately address these use types. First being wholesale freight and shipping, which is contains the cannabis transportation use, and the second being cannabis testing, which links to our research services use classification. The proposed land use amendments would result in dispensaries and micro through tier 1 cultivations being permitted in the areas highlighted on the map illustrated on the slide, with a note that there would be conditional uses in B1 and B2 districts. Tier 2 cultivation would be allowed as illustrated on the slide, again with the note that it is a conditional use within the B3 districts. And finally, tier 3 and up cultivation would be permitted in those areas highlighted, which are the limited and heavy industrial areas.
Forgot to unmute again. Staff recommend prohibiting commercial cannabis cultivation and cannabis product manufacturing as home occupations. To clarify, this doesn't include cultivation for personal use permitted by state law, only commercial businesses. Title 20 zoning code already contains a section regulating home occupations. According to this section, home occupations must be accessory or subordinate to the use of the structure as a residence. The current ordinance also states that home occupations which alter the residential character of the property or produce noise or odor are not permitted as home occupations. Cultivation is energy intensive and produces waste products and wastewater. Commercial and industrial locations are often better suited to accommodate the electrical and waste needs of cultivation operations. Building standards do not adequately address public health and safety concerns for home-based cultivation and manufacturing, and are more difficult to enforce at local or at residential locations, specifically in relation to proper ventilation, safe electrical setup, use of solvents or heat and pressure, and prevention of mold. Currently, there are not proposed updates to our building code to mitigate these concerns. These uses have the potential to impact residential neighborhood character. So staff determined that neither cultivation or cannabis product manufacturing align with our current home occupation standards. Currently, there are permitted medical cannabis cultivation and manufacturing home occupations in Missoula. These would be considered legal nonconforming if council votes to prohibit these uses as home occupations, meaning they can continue operating until the business is intentionally abandoned at that location.
In addition, as staff was examining the impacts and forecasting what those might be, we received several concerns that over the overconcentration of cannabis retail facilities in any given area. In response to that, and in order to preserve a diverse mix of uses within our commercial corridors, staff is proposing a 500-foot buffer applied as seen on the slide as a radius buffer from the building boundaries. This is to disperse dispensaries throughout the allowed areas and not over-concentrate them in any one given area to prevent the mix of amenities being available to residents adjacent to these commercial areas.
Okay, and just one clarification on the last part. Staff are proposing that we measure that buffer from the parcel line of the parcel containing the dispensary. So I'm going to show you a few maps of what different dispensary buffer options look like. Staff are starting off with a 500-foot buffer. If you want to see zoomed in maps for specific areas of town, they were included with the documents on eScribe, or I can pull them up for reference after the presentation as well. So zoning districts permitting dispensaries are shown in pink. Existing dispensaries are shown as green dots, and the rings around them are the proposed buffers. So if the buffer were adopted, dispensaries could locate within the pink area anywhere outside of the green rings. The state bill requires that dispensaries be located at least 500 feet from the entries of schools and places of worship. So schools and buffers from the building footprint are depicted in blue to give you a better idea of the constraints. And for next week's hearing, I plan to add places of worship to the maps as well. So on this slide, there's the 500-foot buffer from existing dispensaries shown. You can see there is still a lot of properly zoned space to allow additional new dispensaries in all neighborhoods. But some areas like downtown along Broadway, the Hip Strip, and the intersection of Russell and Broadway are somewhat close to reaching capacity. Spencer, next slide. At 750 feet, the buffer decreases the area of available space even more. So for example, downtown, almost the entire area east of Orange Street appears to be very close to capacity with this buffer. Gets a little more constrained, but there's still a lot of space available. Next slide. And then at the 1,000-foot buffer, new dispensaries would be primarily limited to the Reserve Street area, the development park, the area around Southwest Brook Street, and the commercial area directly west of Orange Street. We've received feedback from business owners that finding commercial spaces for cannabis uses can be very difficult. So the 1,000-foot buffer may be a bit over restrictive given other constraints new businesses are experiencing. Next slide. So to obscure cannabis products and improve security, dispensaries around Missoula have been installing frosted glass, window decals, or otherwise obscuring view from the street. These treatments cause the storefront to act much like a dead space or blank wall that doesn't provide much in terms of creating an interesting street frontage for pedestrians to enjoy. Additionally, storefront displays are an important part of downtown Missoula's character and urban form. They are also promoted for all commercial corridors by city policies like design excellence. Crime prevention through environmental design is a report on best practices stating that when more people are able to see outside from inside a home or business and vice versa, overall safety is improved. The diagram here shows how active building frontages with windows, balconies, and frequent entries allow for passive interaction between these spaces. Essentially, people are more likely to behave better when they get the sense people inside of surrounding buildings can see out onto the street versus when they look around and just see a dead, empty space. It also allows more people to notice potential accidents on the street and call for help. Staff are concerned that as the number of dispensaries increases in Missoula, the connection between building frontages and public spaces will be diminished by opaque windows. Currently, design excellence requires a certain percentage of glazing or windows on the street-facing facades. These windows must be at least 60% transparent to promote these active frontages. This requirement only applies in the design excellence overlay currently, which is applicable to downtown and major commercial corridors. However, not all business, commercial, and industrial zoned parcels are included in the overlay, which means they don't have to comply with these transparency requirements. You can see that some of the businesses in the photos are within design excellence, which currently does require transparency, but they don't meet the requirements. To clarify, these windows were installed without staff knowledge and didn't go through zoning review necessarily. So in the future, staff will notify applicants of these requirements at business license and building permit to make sure the owners are aware and can come up with alternative solutions. So the state requires that product be obscured from view of the street. Staff's intention is that businesses meet the state requirement, but with methods that don't result in the loss of storefronts, that storefront transparency that's important for neighborhood character. Staff are recommending that the transparency requirements of design excellence be applied to all dispensaries across the city by adding a section to the use and building specific standards section in zoning code. And some alternatives for meeting both the state requirement and this local requirement, if approved by city council for transparency. These alternatives may include, but are not limited to, strategically designing the floor plan to meet both regulations or creating a lobby area in the front of the store. We understand some spaces might be too small to modify the floor plans, so we intend to include an option that allows decorated window boxes that provide that storefront activation, but allow the retail area to be obscured. And that window box option would be best suited for smaller spaces, but would be made available to all dispensaries regardless of size, just to allow for some flexibility in other ways they could go about meeting the goals of both the state and our local design regulations.
To provide some timelines for staff's or implementing the proposed land use amendments. Tonight, we're meeting with you as part of a special presentation to bring you up to speed and preparing for the planning board public hearing on November 2nd. And the first reading, the consent agenda for City Council on November 1st, with a City Council public hearing on November 15th, and a final consideration on November 29th, giving the 30-day period after the final consideration to go for the ordinance to go into effect before January 1st, when legal adult use cannabis will be fully on board. In summary, staff is proposing 4 land use amendments. The first is to align Title 20, the zoning code ordinance, with state definitions by updating land use classifications to include cannabis uses. The second is to prohibit commercial cultivation as a home occupation. And the third is to preserve a diverse mix of uses by implementing a 500-foot buffer between dispensaries. And finally, staff is proposing to limit non-transparent glazing for cannabis dispensaries. This concludes staff's presentation, and we are open to questions and comments.
Awesome. Thanks you all. That was great. Does anybody have any comments or questions at this time? Toon, go ahead.
Yeah, I was hoping you could just, I read through the report and I wanted to better understand. So cannabis isn't specifically called out. And so one of the recommendations is to make it a kind of a sub, I can't remember the term, but to identify it as a subcategory of business. Would that impact anybody's ability to create a dispensary, or is that just more of a record keeping kind of thing so you guys can better track?
So for, say, retail dispensaries, that won't really change where they're allowed and how it's implemented now. But for cultivation, in the past, because it wasn't explicitly stated, Title 20 asks that when a use isn't explicitly stated, we find the closest use classification to that based on the business activities. So for cultivation, we've just been calling it all limited manufacturing. And now with the release of the state tiers and looking at specifically canopy area, we've decided to split that up and use the canopy area as a tool for defining which zoning districts are appropriate for what scale of grow operation. So that'll be a little bit different.
Great, thanks. And then just a quick follow-up, separate question. Like there was some discussion in the report about looking at limiting total number based on, some other localities have capped the number. Can you speak more to sort of the thought around that and why it's not something that you're pursuing? Or is that more, are you going to look into it, but you can't quite comment on that at this time?
So I can speak to that. We aren't proposing a cap at this time. That was a methodology to address the impacts that we had identified early on in our research gathering phase. A lot of municipalities that we examined across the Mountain West use caps to limit the sorts of impacts that we've expressed previously in our presentation. Instead of going the cap route, staff is proposing a buffer, that 500-foot buffer for dispensaries. And that's to allow, and in effect, it produces a de facto cap because there's a limited amount of retail space available, and there's a finite amount of spaces zoned for this sort of retail. So with the cap in place, or with the buffer in place, sorry, we're hoping that that will help to limit those effects while not limiting the business portion or limiting potential business owners' options in developing in Missoula.
And I'll just add to that too, caps are citywide and they don't really look at specific neighborhoods in those smaller locations where we're trying to get a diverse mix of uses in all commercial centers for the surrounding people. And the buffer just pays better attention to the neighborhood level versus a cap.
Great, thank you.
Great. Good answers there, folks. Let's see. I had Shane next and then Ellie.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Sounds like the legislature requires a 500-foot radius from schools. Is that correct?
Correct. And unlike the buffer we're proposing from parcel line, they measure it from the entries of the school.
And so it kind of looks like from your map that there are existing, that there's already conflict in some of those situations. How would that be addressed? Is that an existing non-conforming situation, or would they need to pack up and leave, or how does that work?
And I'll explain too, this map can be a little misleading because it shows the buffer on both. Really, you're looking at that school building can't be within the green circle and that green dot can't be within a blue circle. You'll see their buffers overlap a bit, but that wouldn't be a non-conforming issue. With schools and places of worship, because that's a state requirement, they'll be implementing that versus us. Of course, we will notice if a school's too close and maybe they missed it, but there should not be non-conforming situations currently. But like I said, because of the way the mapping is, you'll see buffers overlap, but as long as the actual business itself isn't in that buffer, it's okay.
And to add on to that, yes, they will be considered legal non-conforming and will be permitted to function in those retail spaces until such a time in which, as defined in Title 20, they cease to operate. And then so let's say another sort of retail operation were to occupy space that was previously a cannabis dispensary that was non-conforming, they would not be able to revert back to the cannabis dispensary if that is clear.
Yeah, I think that, let me just try to recap it. So the state legislature doesn't allow a place of worship or just a school, I think, from being within 500 feet. I get the overlapping, radius issue. Separate from that, I think what you guys are talking about is if there are two cannabis-related businesses within 500 feet of each other right now, then they would be listed as existing non-conforming, and if a business turned over, they wouldn't be able to repopulate a building that was within 500 feet of that. Is that correct?
It would be when they abandon the use. So if you had one dispensary swap out for another dispensary, we'd say that that use is still there, even though they change a business name or something. So they'll be able to continue, but it's when they actually use that space for something else that they can't go back and put another one there.
Okay. And is the places of worship in the state legislature, or is that just something that we've kind of created here also?
That's in the state legislature. And for our next hearing on the 2nd, I plan to get those places of worship added to these maps so you can see what other constraints there are. We just had to track them all down, which was a little bit difficult.
Great. I mean, maybe just a comment then. It might be useful to see the entire outline of the circle so that we can kind of see if there are existing nonconformities as opposed to the blurring of the radiuses, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can definitely do that.
Great, appreciate it.
Great, thanks, Shane. Let's see, had Ellie next and then Neva after Ellie.
My question was answered in the last question. Thanks.
Oh, okay, great. All right, we'll move on to Neva.
Hi, thank you. And thanks to the staff for doing an excellent job. You all have presented a lot of material very professionally and well, and I really appreciate it. I would like to ask you to return to the slide early on that had the public health and safety concerns listed, including volatile organic compound. Yeah, there you go. I'm concerned about the production of cannabis and how it might fall under the radar of existing environmental laws because it is not recognized by the federal government. And I don't claim to have any real expertise in the laws related to cannabis at the federal level, but that when it lists, the VOCs, right? Pesticides, well, which ones? Extractants, fertilizer impacts on air, water quality, utility infrastructure. Those are pretty major concerns that I have and about the production process. And I appreciate that they're being placed kind of in a manufacturing zone, if I understood it, correctly. And yet, here's my point. I would really love it if the staff could look into the fact that the federal government requires a toxics release inventory, right? So if you're a stationary source and that you use toxics that include a long list of things, including probably many of the things involved in cannabis production. And they have to report it, right? If you're a stationary source, right? So factory or whatever. And essentially, these are going to be stationary sources, or one could argue that. I mean, I suppose it is arguable the other way, right? Because it's agriculture. However, my interest is the toxics release inventory requires that stationary sources release the information on the amounts and dates of when they put whatever chemicals, on a particular list into the environment, right? Because we don't track that, right? We put this stuff into the environment all the time and we don't track it, except this is one place that we do with stationary sources. And it could be controversial about whether or not cannabis production is a stationary source of pollution or not. Regardless of that, it's not going to be covered by the federal laws with respect to that, but it could be covered in our zoning laws. We could require that these companies provide basic information on the release of toxic chemicals or the use of toxic chemicals in their facilities. And that's not only for concern about water quality and air quality, but also emergency responses, right? Well, as you guys may know, or maybe you don't know, but we've had incidents here in Montana where, major spills have occurred and we haven't been ready with emergency response, right? And so what kinds of emergency response is necessary to ensure that this cannabis production is safe? So,
thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Sorry, I went on. But
no, you're good.
Yeah, you guys are really good too, and I really appreciate what you're doing. But let's not gloss over this, because we could set some really important precedent right here. Because if they just report, they're going to be licensed, right? If they're going to use VOCs or pesticides or whatever, why not report it? Why not release it to the public so that when a firefighter is running into a building, they know what's in there? That's what this is about. And so, should be an emergency response team. Anyway, thanks for listening. Appreciate your work.
Yeah, I was just gonna say we can, before next meeting, check in with the health department and fire department and see if they have any comments on that and look into it some more for sure.
Great, awesome question, Neva. Micah, you were next.
Yeah, thanks you all for the presentation. It's very helpful. I have two questions related to the frosted glass alternatives and what that's going to look like. So the first question is, are existing businesses going to be required to alter their storefronts to be in alignment with this if it does go through city council? And then the other question is, how do you envision presenting these alternative options to businesses as they're going through their licensure?
Yeah, so for I guess right now, because we haven't adopted these transparency requirements outside of the design excellence overlay, outside of that design excellence overlay, they'll be considered legal non-conforming if it's already happened and allowed to continue. They just can't be less compliant. Or if someone moves into a space that maybe wasn't a dispensary, but already has tinted windows, same thing, we're not going to force you to replace windows that were like that when you got the space, but you just can't make it worse. As far as ones within design excellence that currently don't apply, we met with our code compliance staff. They said due to staff capacity issues and just the high amount of complaints they get, that they've been instructed to handle things on a complaint-based system. And considering people don't complain about these much, we may not go out and reach out to them to come into compliance, just for the sake of what they can handle in their workload at this time. But if they do, go to renew their business license, we can let them know, hey, you're out of compliance, just as a notification, and let them know they can't do anything to make it worse at this time. Oh, and then, sorry, you had a second part of that, alternatives. Can you repeat the alternatives portion of your question?
Yeah, I guess this is a little ways down the road if, new businesses coming on in 2023 or beyond. But if a business is going through licensure, how do you envision, presenting these alternative options to them? Like, how will they get that information?
Yeah, so if they're at building permit, then we will enforce those at the building permit stage. If they don't get a building permit and go right to business licensing, with their approval, we plan to send a letter and notice of these requirements to make sure they won't convert it. Within the proposed ordinance itself, we're building in that sort of incentive for window boxes as an alternative to that transparent glass to give some more flexibility. And then really just working with them to come up with ideas for possible floor plan layouts or lobby areas or ways to meet both codes. Hoping we see some creativity from the businesses on that part as well.
Great. Neva, your hand's up again. Do you have another question?
I do. As you guys might remember, with the zoning that the county did with respect to cryptocurrency, one of the major requirements was that the facilities provide, I believe it was 100% of their electricity and energy needs through new renewable resources. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if we might not consider making a similar requirement through this kind of a zoning here, because the capacity for I have not really studied this very much other than I've seen it, driving through Oregon or whatever, and I've read a few articles about it, but the energy use can be extremely high. And if we're going to hold cryptocurrency to that standard, then I think we should hold cannabis to that standard, And so is that something, Cassie or Spencer, that you guys could look into? And like an energy production requirement for cannabis production? Right. So Jenny Dixon, I think, was on the call earlier. She and Diana Mineta at the county know all about what the county just did with respect to cryptocurrency. I think we should really look at that here. Why they should produce their own energy, just like any other major new industrial facility, because that's what a lot of these are. This isn't like somebody's, closet production anymore. But we could require lava lamps instead of the glazing as a change of pace. Never mind, it's just a joke.
Energy concerns have been brought up previously. I think and there are concerns over the energy consumption. The structures in which we implement those sorts of restrictions or controls or incentivize those things have yet to be laid out, and staff is hesitant in implementing a one business or one industrial use requirement without examining the other similar industrial applications. So the county considered the cryptocurrency mining and the impacts on energy use, but the city has yet to implement anything within that framework. And so we are concerned jumping the gun without more research in regards to energy consumption in this industry and industries similar to it. So especially moving forward, if we were to propose something like this, it would have to be robust and with a lot of, again, evidence and data to support it. And at this time, that's not available to us.
Oh yeah, well, I'm going to push back on that, and I think we really need to look at this, like what kind of production is anticipated, not only within the city but in the county, the two combined, right? Obviously, we're all one community, and so. I'm gonna really push back on that. We have climate change goals. There's got to be evidence of how much production utilizes in other places, and what is we could make guesses about what's anticipated here. And I actually think it's better to get in front of it now, rather than wait and be trying to impose something on existing businesses later. And I say all this I don't have a problem with legalization at all, but I am very concerned about the production processes that are used today to produce pot on an industrial scale. And that could easily surround Missoula, cheap energy. We have to get out in front of this on the energy thing. I'm sorry, you guys, I hate to disagree with you. And I know you've done tons of research and I respect that. And I'll stop now, but I'm not gonna give up on this because I think it's a really important point. And please reach out to Diana Mineta and Jenny Dixon for more ideas on this, because I think you have more latitude than you might anticipate. Or not latitude, but more evidence to make decisions upon. Thank you.
And that's not to say never. It's something that when we talked about it with staff, they were hoping to build in not just for this use, but for other uses with our code reform happening in the next few years. But we can bring it back to staff and say maybe it's more urgent and express your concerns and see where to go from there.
Cassie, happy to jump in on that too. We have, in our conversations with staff looked at we can scale the current impacts of manufacturing and cultivation based on the state limit that people who did not have a license before November of 2020 can't expand. So there is, I would say, more rough conversations about having more robust energy research behind it and coming back with different revisions by that July 1st of 2023 deadline. Because you're not wrong. There is a lot of research that goes into the impacts of these uses in other places, and it's worth looking at. But in order to meet the other timelines that we were trying to do, we realized this was just much more of a bigger lift, which is, I think, what my coworkers also are indicating.
Yeah, with all due respect, one quick response. I've been on this board for a long time, and we never get to that zoning piece that you're referring to. And so, in fact, we are going to be zoning for cannabis, which is coming right now, which we know some things about. And the production is not regulated at all, right? I mean, because it's so, and it's not covered by our major environmental laws. So anyway, I really want to encourage you to take a look more closely at that piece. And thank you very much.
Great. All right. Thanks, everybody. That was a good discussion. And I think with that, we're going to close this presentation out. Cassie, Spencer, Madsen, that was fantastic. Thank you for your informative presentation. And we will see you again November 2nd. Is that right? Yep.
That's correct.
Great. Okay. Okay, folks, we got one more presentation ahead of us tonight, and then I think we'll be able to close things out fairly quickly. So our next presentation is Missoula County Housing Action Plan. We have Jordan Lyons with the Missoula County presenting for us tonight. And Jordan, you have the floor. Go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks so much for having me. And yeah, I'm Jordan Lyons, housing specialist, and I'm really glad to be here. Is everybody seeing a PowerPoint presentation? Okay, great, cool. All right, well, yeah, thanks so much. I know it's been a long night, so I'll go quick, but I'm sure to give you time if you have questions or anything. Please let me know, and I can stop in between, and I'll give you some time at the end also. Karen Hughes is here too, and I just want to say, Karen let me know she had to reconnect and was downgraded to a panelist, so she'll have to be, or from a panelist to an attendee, so she'll have to be upgraded if anyone needs to hear from Karen. So I'm just putting that, especially on Donna's radar.
I think that just happened there. Jordan.
Oh, okay, cool, great. All right. Okay, Missoula County Housing Action Plan, breaking ground. So you may have seen our plan is available now. I'll just give a little context. It's happy Halloween, everybody. Housing is a wicked problem. So that's kind of a joke, but also a wicked problem is a real term in public policy, and a wicked problem is something that it doesn't have one obvious solution. It has many contrary indicators. It's very complex. It has a lot of trade-offs involved with addressing it. And, and so housing is kind of the quintessential wicked problem. And naturally, when we have a wicked problem, the answer to that is not just some top-down answer we can plug into things. We really need to come up with an answer that's or solutions that are appropriate to Missoula County and that are based on input from the community. So I wanted to give you a rundown for our housing action plan. This is just a little bit of the input we've had from our community for our consultants, Echo Northwest, other county staff, and myself. We included questions about housing on the community needs assessment. We had 887 responses, which was way more than we've ever had on that survey, which we do annually. We recruited a steering committee that included developers, folks from housing nonprofits, and other community leaders from around the county. And we also did a lot of stakeholder engagement. So we spoke one-on-one with a lot of diverse stakeholders all over the county, and had some group meetings also. I also want to mention, we're really fortunate that we really were not starting from zero with this plan. We have a lot of really great resources in Missoula County. So we have the city's A Place to Call Home policy. and the Missoula Organization of Realtors reports. So some really, really wonderful resources that we could build on. And then, of course, another really important resource is Missoula County's growth policy. And, you know, housing is one of the topics that the growth policy addresses by statute. And this is what Missoula County's 2016 growth policy says that the county's goals are about housing. So at that time, the growth policy said one of the goals was to provide opportunities for a wide range of housing choices, especially for those who are homeless or experiencing high costs for housing relative to income. And some of the actions that the growth policy prescribed were projecting needed units, identifying areas for housing, creating zoning in more communities, developing incentives for affordable housing development, and creative financing tools. So, you know, I think that's a great place to start from. And I really think that our housing action plan really complements that and really builds on that. And we'll talk more about that towards the end too. The conditions that we found in researching our housing action plan are that, you know, I think we all know that housing affordability is a real challenge in Missoula County right now. And basically this kind of upstream factor in that we found for our housing action plan is that we currently have a shortage of about 2,400 housing units in Missoula County. So we just don't have enough units, and that's kind of what drives, you know, the high prices to purchase homes, high rents, and low rental vacancies that we see here in Missoula County. And then the other thing we found, the other important housing condition to note, is that the market is not going to produce enough units to meet demand in the near term, and especially not for folks who have low to moderate incomes, who are the most impacted by the housing shortage. There's a lot of really wonderful information in the housing action plan. And one thing that it's easy to skip over and go right to the recommendations, but there's a really great part called the framework for action that really gives some good tools to really think about housing. And one chart that our consultants created that I think is super helpful is this one that kind of shows this housing continuum. And this kind of helped me understand that really when we talk about affordable housing as kind of one issue, but it's really kind of two interrelated issues. And those are kind of like the two ranges on this. So this is right, this up and down line with the dots on it is kind of like a spectrum of incomes, right? And then in this kind of peach colored range down at the bottom, that's the supported environment. So that's like you know, folks who make, you know, maybe 30% of income, of area median income, they're going to have a hard time ever affording a rental or purchasing a home in the private market. And they're going to need help, you know, in the form of a, you know, maybe a voucher or living in a low income housing tax credit property. And so that's the supported environment. And then most folks in Missoula County live in the market environment, and that's, you know, so in the private market. And that is really especially where I think decisions that the planning board makes can really have an impact, especially in that area. And I want to point out too, there is a little overlap. And, you know, I think a couple of the problems that we have right now is one is we have a very low overlap between the market environment and the supported environment. So like when you see an article in the paper that someone, you know, people are getting housing choice vouchers, but then they can't find an apartment where they can apply them. You know, that's that breakdown of that overlap not being big enough. And then the other problem we have in our market environment right now with this shortage causing things to be so expensive is, overall costs are growing. And what happens in the private market, and where you get some kind of what's sometimes called, like naturally occurring affordable housing, is that, when a unit, maybe you have a luxury unit that's brand new, time goes by, it depreciates a little bit. There are some newer units around it, and the price of it moderates. It becomes something that's more affordable to someone with closer to the median income. But what we have right now in Missoula County is we have prices going up faster than those prices for individual units can filter down. And so everybody is having a harder time affording housing. And then, so there are like several models like that are really helpful to think about. Another one is this types of strategies to support housing production. So if we're going to build more units, there's this kind of continuum of things we can do. And on the left-hand side, we have these kind of less impactful activities like producing informational resources. And on the right-hand side, we have the most impactful. So, that would be like this acquire and allocate funding or land acquisition and disposition. And so, not surprisingly, those very direct things of like the county is going to give money, it's going to give land to build affordable properties, those have the most impact. But but I think one thing that correlates pretty well with this impact is the resource intensity of those, right? So, that can have a lot of impact to give money, give land, but those are going to be, really resource intensive, have, potentially some trade-offs, be expensive to pull off. So, and I want to point out too that like a lot of what you all see in the planning board, I think is kind of in the middle of this too. Like we have this, removing regulatory barriers. So we're really talking about things that can really have like, be moderate in terms of their resource intensity and also their impact on housing affordability. So with that in mind, with those kind of unique roles, all those different things Missoula County government can do, that kind of led us to develop kind of 3 goals. I'll tell you all 3, and I want to really especially zoom in on the first goal because I think that's like the most relevant to your purview. And I sure can talk more about the others if you have questions or you're curious, or I could talk to you in another venue about it too. I'd be really glad to do that. But so the goals that we established are, number 1, using the county's toolkit to increase the housing supply. And so that toolkit includes things like zoning, infrastructure, and use of county lands. And I just want to put out right now on that discussion of the use of county lands, it's just really important to remember the context of, housing affordability is an important issue, but it's one issue. It exists in a context of other issues and needs. And so, lands need to fulfill a lot of different needs that may be, protecting our natural environment or recreation opportunities, quality of life. So I just want to put that out there that, housing is one need for those and one use for those, but it is one among many. A second goal that we had was provide more funding for programs to help people access and stay in stable housing. And then third is partner with the city, housing nonprofits, and developers to improve policy. And so that one's really like acknowledging that, Missoula County has some unique powers, but we also have some constraints. This is not something we can totally address on our own. We have to partner and advocate. But I want to talk a little more. I feel like that first goal is kind of the land use goal and land use actions. And so I want to talk a little more about that, the recommended actions there. So some of the recommendations we developed were investing in infrastructure needed to enable housing development, establishing zoning countywide to create more certainty for developers, creating incentives to produce income restricted affordable rental development, and exploring opportunities to improve the permitting process. And just to give a little more detail on each of those, for infrastructure, we want to accelerate planning for an investment in infrastructure, sewer, water, roads, broadband, and transit. And we want to, and we have a 3-year time horizon on the plan. So in that 3 years, where we really think it's important to develop infrastructure and make it easier for more development to occur, is around the Missoula urban area and also in Lolo and Seeley Lake. And so that doesn't mean other areas aren't important too, but that's just kind of where we see where we should prioritize in that short to medium time frame. Also, we want to increase zoning, take zoning countywide, and that's underway, right? And you all know a lot about that. Finishing the zoning regulations project, updating the land use map and zoning for the rest of the county. Zoning, if we want to create those incentives for affordable housing, we have to have zoning to do that. And the whole purpose of that is to provide more certainty, predictability for developers, make things, faster, cheaper, less risky for them. And when we think about that, if we want to reduce that regulatory burden, if in areas where we have zoning and infrastructure, that's where we could maybe have the streamlined subdivision review that was passed in SB 161. And that's, if y'all have questions about that would be a really good time. We're going to be really glad Karen's a panelist again. So that's that opportunity. And I just would remind folks too that, a lot of times I've been doing a lot of presentations and working with a lot of members of the public, and that regulatory relief factor is a huge factor for the public. But it's important to keep in mind that, as we saw on that continuum, it's not the end all be all of resolving our housing issues. It's one tool among many in the toolkit. But there are opportunities to do that. And so that kind of takes us into the permitting process. Also, there's some actions recommended for that: convening stakeholders, including staff and developers, conducting focus groups, and then ultimately we want to improve communication between the development community and county staff, and change workflows and address regulations to have an overall improved process. And so those are the recommendations. Just to give you the rundown of the next steps, our goal is to see this housing action plan adopted as an issue plan. Amend the growth policy to attach this as an issue plan. And where we are right now in that process is collecting feedback from the public from now until November 12th. So I'll show you the link at the end. We have a questionnaire that you can fill out, where you're always welcome to, email me your feedback. That's fine. We're going to incorporate the feedback we receive in creation of a public hearing draft. I'll be back with our consultants to conduct a public hearing at your meeting on the 7th. And then based on what comes out of that, we will be talking with the Board of County Commissioners early next year. And so I really encourage you all to participate and to help spread the word. We have our webpage, missoula.co/housing. You can read the whole plan there and complete the questionnaire. I would also encourage you, feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call. I'd be really glad to meet with any of you and talk more about this. And finally, I just want to open it up for any questions or comments that you might have for me tonight.
Great, thanks, Jordan. That was a informative presentation. Does anybody have any questions for Jordan or Karen tonight? Oh boy, maybe everybody's tired. I'm not seeing any hands yet. Oh, here we go. Dave, go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that. But I guess a question to Jordan is the issue about actual housing being converted into non-commercial short-term rentals part of your vision, and maybe a way to limit those elimination of actual housing. So yeah, that's
Great question, Dave. And yeah, we have one recommendation that is exactly what the action that we recommended at this point is to do a study of them. And so yeah, we don't really know how many we have, or you know, how direct the competition is between them. But I mean, we think they're having an impact on the long-term rental market, but we need to be a little more informed on that. But yeah, and I can't remember which number that is off the top of my head, but there's one recommendation that's like the title of it is study vacation rentals and second homes.
Okay, Tum.
Hi, I'm curious if there's been any discussion, or if you want to comment on, or whether or not it's really an issue as far as the makeup of the housing market in terms of, I guess I'm having a hard time articulating what I'm trying to get at, but I've read that mixing higher value homes with more affordable homes in the same neighborhood is a positive development strategy, and I'm just curious if that is something that as part of this plan has been considered, because as we know in Missoula, there is a tendency to sort of have different neighborhoods where there's a higher concentration of what you describe as luxury housing versus more affordable, which tends to be in other neighborhoods. And I'm just curious if that's something that we want to address with this housing policy.
That's a great question, and I wonder too if that is, Karen, is that one that you would want to weigh in on first?
Yeah, Jordan, I think that's a great question. And I think that's one of those things that comes out in our planning processes, is what the desired outcome is for development in our communities. And I think that we figure out through those planning processes kind of what our values are, and then develop goals and land use strategies to try and achieve those. So for example, in the Swipticane area, where we really tried to create a situation that would provide the opportunities for a mix of housing types for that kind of urbanizing area, seemed very appropriate based on and that's something that kind of was generated out of the planning process. We would expect the planning process for, well, it definitely is part of the land use element, which is what the zoning code is intended to implement. And so especially in the more urbanized areas, you will see in the zoning code opportunities to mix it up and provide a wide range of housing types. And then as we move forward and finish the land use map update and develop zoning for the rest of the county, we would be having those discussions to figure out, whether it's Lolo or Sealy Lake or any community, what they envision for their community. And oftentimes, especially in the more dense areas, the towns themselves, people want to see a mix of not just housing, but uses. But it's kind of one of those things that comes out of the planning process.
Great, thank you.
Great, good question, Tom. Anybody else? Oh, Ellie, it's got her hand up. Go ahead.
Hey, so that number of 2,400 housing units short, where does that come from?
So what that basically comes from is that you need to have one thing that you need to have an affordable housing market is that you need a few more housing units than you have households in a community. And so you can see on our on page C of our draft plan, and I'll just remind folks this is a draft, so this is not all final, but we have about 50,800 households and 55,500 housing units. So we have a ratio of 1.09 housing units to households. Nationally, there's about 1.14. So there's a little more slack in those national ratios. And so what happens is, similar to employment, kind of like you need to have units available so that someone can move from one unit to another or something like that. And if you don't, even though it would nominally, it seems like you have a few more units than you have households. That's not enough to give enough slack to let people move around, and that scarcity is going to make it so you have low vacancy, higher rents, and higher home prices.
Thank you. I have another question. Well, so one of the things that you had listed on your slides was incentivizing affordable housing to try to help increase that space, essentially where there's supportive housing. Are there tools for requirements versus incentives or possibilities?
So this is coming into the zoning code, and you'll be seeing this soon, the next version soon. But most of it has to do with using incentives to encourage people to do that, which is probably the easiest way to do it through zoning. The legislature took away the opportunity to do inclusionary zoning, which is the requirement to include a certain number of affordable units in housing developments. So that's not an option anymore. So the best mechanism we can do is provide, in appropriate zones, provide ample opportunity for a variety of housing types that allow for a wide range of options and affordability, and then to incentivize things like subsidized housing.
Cool, thank you for that answer. Great.
Okay, is there anybody else with questions for Karen or Jordan? All righty. Not seeing any hands up at this time. Kind of feels like we've gotten everything all the way out. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll call that presentation. Thank you so much, Jordan. That was a great presentation. Karen, appreciate you attending.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
All right, folks. I think we just got to make our way through the last of the business here. So the next line item on the agenda is committee reports. And I believe we do not have anything at this time. Am I mistaken? Yep. And Tung, you're going to that meeting on Thursday, I think I was told today. Is that correct?
Super exciting. Super excited for it.
Thank you. Greatly appreciate you stepping in there and taking that on. All right, no reports. And then old business, we were going to look at the US Highway 93 follow-up discussion, but we went ahead and tabled that since Josh isn't here, which feels real appropriate since we're running up on 8:30. So that brings us to new business and referrals. Does anybody have anything along that line? Anything else? Any other discussion? Anything anybody needs to bring up to the board as a whole? Not seeing anything. And with that, I think we can call this meeting adjourned for this evening. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jim. I appreciated that point of order.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, everybody.
Good job, Sean.